Plenty of areas to point fingers at after the Washington Commanders nearly squandered a big win on the road, but none of those fingers, in my opinion, should be pointed at offensive coordinator Kliff Kingsbury. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome inside today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host of this program, David Harrison, covering the Washington Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com. You can also find me helping out with WUSA9.com's local coverage of the team this season. I'm here with you every Monday through Friday. I thank you for coming through today. Everydayers who come through every day, I appreciate you, especially for coming through as often as you do. Locked On Commanders is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to this episode, where we're going to talk about Terry McLaurin leading the stars of the game. No, we're not. We're going to talk about Marshon Lattimore being the MVP of the game. We're also going to go over our sustains and our improves from the Week 15 win over the New Orleans Saints. And we're going to kick it all off by talking about why Kliff Kingsbury certainly responsible for the 20-point offensive output, production of his offense, but not to blame. We'll get into the difference here in just a little bit. We're going to do so thanks to Game Time. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. There's plenty of areas to point fingers at, to blame for the Washington Commanders' near collapse. You can call it actually a collapse, but not full collapse. Obviously, you still get the win, so you still get to celebrate the victory. But in my opinion, none of the blame should be pointed at Kliff Kingsbury. Now, of course, like we just said, Kliff Kingsbury is responsible for the 20 points scored by his offense. Certainly should have scored more, but there's a difference between blame and responsibility. It's kind of like blaming the writers of a show or a movie because a good script was executed poorly by a bad director or by bad acting. That's kind of the way I look at this a little bit. And when you look at what the Washington Commanders did in our after-action review, like we'd like to do after every single game, Kliff Kingsbury is actually going to be the first sustain for this AAR episode. So what was supposed to happen in Week 15 is the Washington Commanders were supposed to go into New Orleans and defeat the 5-8, now 5-9 New Orleans Saints by 7.5 points. So by more than a touchdown. What actually ended up happening is that the Commanders got the 1-point win. And again, at the end of the day, there's no style points here. There's no AP top 25 poll. There's no voting a team or voting a team into or out of the NFL playoffs. So at the end of the day, getting the victory alone is good enough. But when you have a game like this, you certainly want to go back and look at what went wrong and where this team can get better, but also where this team can build off their success. And for me, that's where we're going to start this conversation. Our team sustain. We got our stash and our trash episode here. Stash means we're going to sustain things from Week 15 moving forward. Trash is things that we want to leave in Week 15. Don't want to see them again in Week 16. And usually we go player, play, and then team category. But we're going to start with the team category here. And then we're going to talk about Kliff Kingsbury's offensive game plan, not just this week, but also against Tennessee Titans. And I understand the Tennessee Titans, from a prestige standpoint, are a much less prestigious opponent than the New Orleans Saints. And I would say that the Tennessee Titans defense, not as good as the New Orleans Saints defense, but Kliff Kingsbury has been getting a little bit, I wouldn't say a lot, right, but a little bit of hate, a little bit of blame from some parts of the fan base. I'm told some parts of the media here locally are also giving Kliff Kingsbury some blame for the 20-19 win that should have been a bigger win for the Washington Commanders. I'll be honest with you, I don't listen to a lot of DC media. I don't read a lot of DC media because I'm usually busy creating my own DC media. So I don't know exactly who people are talking about when they talk about that. But if you're blaming Kliff Kingsbury for what happened this Sunday, I would say that your blame is a little bit short-sighted. So yes, they scored 20 points against a 5-8 team. That's the stat scouting version of this conversation. But we get past the stat scouting. Let's get into the context. Let's get into the game flow. Let's get into what Kliff Kingsbury conducted, what he directed. 3 missed touchdown connections from Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin. That's just the start of this thing, right? Each play design worked to perfection. Each play design got Terry McLaurin one-on-one, gave him a route that he could obviously run, beat his defender. He did it. Jaden Daniels had time to throw, was given the platform to throw. None of the 3 connected. Neither of the 2 drives those passes came in, because 2 of those passes came in one drive, one of those passes in another drive. Neither of those 2 drives produced any points. So you had 0 points from those drives. If they connect, that's at least 12 more points. This is 6-point touchdowns. And so even if you're missing the extra points, which knock on wood, we hope that wouldn't happen, you're still going to add 12 points to this total, which puts you up to 32. The team itself was put in position for another field goal that unfortunately Greg Joseph missed. So you push that potential scoring, including extra points, up to 37 points scored. That is what Kliff Kingsbury's script, game plan, game flow, game calls, play calls created, was the opportunity for his unit to score 37 points in this game. The plays, the players, the execution cost the coordinator points to the tune of 17 points. They cost themselves almost as many points as they scored, but the opportunities to score those points were there, and that is the offensive coordinator's job. But Kliff drew up the attack that controlled the ball for 40-plus minutes for the second game in a row. Again, should have produced 37 points or more for the second game in a row, and he did all of it without his number 2 back, without his number 2 receiver, without his number 1 starter. Austin Eckler, Noah Brown, Tyler Biadasz, all out for this game. Then he lost his number 1 tight end, Zach Ertz, who's also the number 2 skill position player in targets on this team, with 6 minutes and 12 seconds left to go in the second quarter in a 1-score game. There are a lot of teams in the National Football League, you look around here, if they lose just their number 2 player in targets, if they lose their starting tight end with nearly 2.5 full quarters of game left to play, they're going to be in a really bad way. Like, let's be completely honest here. If you take the Kansas City Chiefs number 1 receiver, or number 2 receiver rather, you take away Travis Kelce, you take away their starting center, and you take away their number 2 running back, they're not going to be nearly as effective. Now, that's kind of a bad comparison this year because the offense hasn't been that great in Kansas City anyway, but I hope you get the point. Furthermore, Kingsbury's offense has scored in every single game of the game, in every single quarter of the game, I should say, in 8 games this season. They scored in every single quarter against the New Orleans Saints. They've done that a total of 8 times now this year. They're averaging 28.6 points per game in those games. And the team is 7-1 in those games as well. The only game they've lost so far where they've scored in each quarter of the game came against the Baltimore Ravens. Pretty good team this year, even though their record is basically the same as the Washington Commanders. Now, the Commanders' offense was 50% or better on third down for the 6th time this season. They're undefeated in those games. Where the numbers did dip is in yards per play, 4.4 yards per play this weekend against the New Orleans Saints. However, again, you go back to those missed opportunities. The first deep miss to McLaurin was from 52 yards out. That's not air yards. That's total yards gained if they can connect on that pass. The second was from 62. The third was from 54. If you take the 52 and 54-yard plays, so don't even take the 62. Let's take the lowest of the two, and they connect, then you jump that average play yards per play to 6.6 yards per play. And again, that is what Kliff Kingsbury drew up. It was not what was executed, unfortunately, but it's what the coach coordinated. Now, I'm not against criticizing coaches, right? And if you're new to the show, I hope you're not looking at this and say, like, this dude just protects coaches, because that's not what I'm about. Because I've criticized Kliff Kingsbury when he failed to adjust to the Eagles' Bermuda Triangle defense around Terry McLaurin. I continue to criticize Kliff when he continued to fail to adjust against the Dallas Cowboys. I continue to speak about his seeming refusal to bring Chris Rodriguez deeper into the fold and help establish or sustain the power run game, despite the fact that when Chris Rodriguez has gotten the opportunities on this team, and going back to last year even, he's proven that he's capable of helping out on this offense. Again, not saying he should be the primary back or anything like that, but certainly aid in establishing or aid in sustaining that power run game. But this 20-point game against the New Orleans Saints, this 20-point offensive output against the New Orleans Saints, not on Kliff. He designed a game plan that should have nearly doubled the yearly average points allowed by this Saints defense, and he did it again, missing his starting center, losing his starting center right before the game, by the way, losing his number 2 receiver, losing his number 2 back, and losing his number 1 tight end, number 2 targeted player on the team during the game on the road. That's a pretty impressive thing to do, and it really shows the uptick of this team and the potential of this team. Of course, that's just the first thing we want to stash from week 15. We've got 2 more, including the return of a veteran wide receiver and his uptick in play, we won't say thanks to, but for lack of a better term, thanks to the loss of Noah Brown, and a play that illustrates everything we've been screaming about. Speaking of screaming about Kliff Kingsbury this season, when it goes to wide receiver Terry McLaurin. That and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you in part by Game Time, and Game Time is focused on togetherness this holiday season, and that means when you bring people together at live events, the experience is that much better and makes it even more the perfect gift for your favorite friend or family member. Game Time has a cool feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of ticket options. My Game Time picks right now include tickets to see the Eagles face the Commanders this weekend for $154, or I can see the Carolina Hurricanes visit the Washington Capitals for $64, or the New York Knicks for facing the Washington Wizards for $32. Obviously, Game Time knows that I enjoy sports. Curated deals make it easier to find the best prices on the greatest seats to events you want to see. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create your account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Today's episode of Locked On Commanders is also brought to you in part by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle all of the NFL action this weekend and every weekend during the season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, new customers to FanDuel, you can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if that $5 bet wins. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place your live bets on the NFL all in one place. When you're watching any game, it doesn't have to be a Commanders game, it can be any NFL game, and you get a hunch in the middle of that game. You can go to FanDuel, you can check out the latest stats, you can view the live play-by-play, and you get so much more information on the exact same page or app where you can then place your bets with confidence. Or you can make your bets before the game, of course, like the Washington Commanders, who are 3.5-point underdogs at home this weekend against the Philadelphia Eagles, who are looking to clinch the NFC East division. So go to FanDuel.com to sign up today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. Kliff Kingsbury is the first thing we want to stash from the Week 15 win for the Washington Commanders over the New Orleans Saints. We've got two more, and they both include the wide receiver position. One of them, the return of Jamison Crowder, and the second one, a great play designed and drawn up and executed by the Washington Commanders for Terry McLaurin. That's coming up on this episode of Locked On Commanders. If you want to get even more out of the show, all you got to do is become an insider today. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. And from there, I'm going to text you thoughts, takes, information, and news in real time. And you can text me all your thoughts, comments, and questions in real time as well. And you're also going to get access to our insider exclusive Zoom conferences like the one that we had after the game in New Orleans as I headed back from the stadium to my hotel room. It's always a lot of fun. So head to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to try it out for free for the first 2 weeks. Continuing on now with our AAR after action review. We've got 3 things we want to sustain, 3 things we want to get rid of moving into Week 16 from Week 15. And the player that we want to stash, the performance we want to stash, wide receiver Jamison Crowder. Welcome back, Jamison Crowder. All Jamison Crowder has ever done throughout his career, especially while he's suiting up in burgundy gold, is be a consistent part of the offense. 3 targets, 3 catches, 27 yards. Doesn't sound super sexy, but all 3 of those catches came on third downs. One of them converted a 12-yard play. The other 2 put the team in solid field goal range. Now, one of those field goals was unfortunately missed, but again, you look at the offense, you look at the player, he did his part to try to set up his team for success. I think it's really impressive and really just kind of shows the amount of confidence that this team has in Jamison Crowder, especially rookie quarterback Jaden Daniels, when this is Jamison Crowder's first game back after going on IR, and he gets 3 targets all on third downs, all on big play, money downs. Really kind of shows you the confidence that Jaden has in the veteran. Jamison Crowder also bringing in 2 punts, 12 yards returning. Again, not super sexy, but that versatility to contribute in 2 phases is going to be clutch, especially as we get through December into January into the playoffs. So that's the player that we want to sustain for Week 16. Jamison Crowder, a guy who wasn't on the field against Philadelphia Eagles. We'll see what kind of impact he can make the second time around. The play that I chose out of this game was the second touchdown pass from Jaden Daniels to Terry McLaurin. It's a right to left drag route touchdown. Terry McLaurin catching from 3 yards out. The Commanders come in a wing twin formation variation, right? So there's 2 tight ends to one side of the formation lined up in line, creating the wing side, while 2 receivers on the opposite side, creating your twin look. Here, the 2 tight ends are on the boundary side, the shorter side of the field. The receivers are to the field side, the wider side of the field. Now, the variation comes in the fact that typically in a wing twin formation, the quarterback is under center, the running back is behind him as usual. Here, Jaden Daniels is in shotgun with B-Rob lined up right behind him, so more of a pistol look here. So that's kind of the variation there. The formation requires the defense to play against the run. You've got a heavy look to the boundary side, power back lined up behind the quarterback. So you have to obviously account for the run. And then, of course, Jaden Daniels himself is a big part of that. But it also forces them to have to try to account for the pass at the same time because you've got two receivers lined up to the wider side of the field with more room to work. And in this field position at the New Orleans 3, it's a classic flat 7 route combination area where you have that kind of rub route, that pick play where you get a receiver running into the flat. More on that play design here in a little bit. Olamide Zaccheaus ends up being the outside lined up receiver, so you expect him to kind of be that rub pick receiver while Terry McLaurin jets off to the flat to try to get that pass or, any other combination of those types of routes. But instead, Olamide Zaccheaus runs motion at the snap, curls back out towards the boundary while Ben Sinnott, one of the tight ends on the left side of the formation, comes across on a drag of his own, and Terry McLaurin is running his drag right to left behind Ben Sinnott's drag. Play action to Brian Robinson locks the middle defenders in the box, allows McLaurin to get behind those middle defenders undetected while running away from man coverage parallel to the line of scrimmage. Some things that we talked about leading up to the game that we wanted to see Kliff Kingsbury do with Terry. Executes it to perfection. The drag route, classic man beater, which is what the New Orleans Saints were in, works to perfection. Daniels completes a relatively easy 3-yard touchdown pass, takes advantage of the short area of the field while maximizing the use of space. That is always the hardest problem for offenses that deep into the game, or that deep in the field rather, is how do you maximize the use of space with all your players and create some openings? And so for Kliff Kingsbury, Jaden Daniels, Terry McLaurin to be able to create that opening there from the New Orleans 3, thing of beauty, chef's kiss all the way. So those are our 3 things we want to sustain, our stashes for this. Now we get to our 3 trashes, and we're going to start with the player. And again, our regularly scheduled message that this player trash is not calling the player trash, but more so saying this part of the player's performance we want to trash. We want to see get better in the next week. And of course, I think you already know it. We got to look at Benjamin St-Juste, man. In the tradition of Dan Quinn and Adam Peters this season, continuing to dispatch Ron Rivera era players, we may have seen the last of Benjamin St-Juste on defense. And that's a little bit hyperbolic, right? That's a little bit overzealous. But here's the rub. Here's the facts. Benjamin St-Juste, first game Marshawn Lattimore comes in, he only gets 3 defensive snaps. Now, we predicted when Marshawn Lattimore came in to be Marshawn and Mikey outside, Noah Igbenogany inside. That's exactly what it was. But Benjamin St-Juste gets 3 defensive snaps after having no less than 31 defensive snaps every other week this season. That is a massive drop-off. That's not just going to the bench. That is going to, the outlands. I don't know what's called. Michael Davis, who was Benjamin St-Juste backup, got 7 defensive snaps. On his 3 snaps, St-Juste was penalized 33% of the time, 1 out of 3. Illegal hands to the face for grabbing the face mask of a Saints receiver after he was playing in press, overcommitted to the inside release of the receiver, reached out and ended up grabbing the receiver's face mask out of desperation because he was beat. The worst part is he had no impact on the result of the play because Spencer Rattler wasn't even looking to that side of the field as he was being sacked by Dorrance Armstrong Jr., would have sent the Saints off the field for a 3-and-out. Instead, St-Juste penalty gives the Saints offense new life, them getting a field goal. They trim the lead to 20-10, and eventually the Saints are able to get a potentially game-tying, touchdown pass leading to a potential game-tying, extra point or game-winning 2-point conversion that they ended up going to. That is our trash play. That's the play that we certainly want to see improved upon work moving forward, because this is where you end up getting a flat 7 route combination. We talked about the flat 7 route combination probably anticipated by the New Orleans Saints. Here, the Washington Commanders get the flat 7 route combination from the New Orleans Saints at their 1 and don't anticipate it enough. Darrick Forrest gets caught up in the exact scenario that we were talking about from the 1-yard line. Saints tight end Foster Moreau is sprinting into the flat while receiver Cedric Wilson is running the corner or 7 route. So you have to get the flat 7 route combination. His intention running that corner route is to get in the way of the flat defender, who in this case is Darrick Forrest. Forrest has inside zone help from Frankie Louvu, needs to understand that he has that leverage. Overcommit to the outside leverage. This is a classic man beater, end zone, goal line formation play, right? This is not new. It's classic. It's a classic play for a reason. Forrest he's got 2 options. He can either press the line of scrimmage, run through Wilson as he's trying to come off the line of scrimmage and try to beat Moreau to the spot. Not preferred, because if you have a good quarterback, he's just going to throw it over your head anyway. And then again, if Cedric Wilson does his job, there's not going to be a defender out there. Or what you should do is bubble over that defender, over that receiver, I should say, bubble over the pick, which now does two things. One, it gives you better leverage angle to defend the flat. You go around that pick and you come downhill hard and you lay the dude out, or you try to get a hand on the ball. Two, it draws you outside of the range where offensive players are allowed to make contact with defensive players, vice versa. That's where you get those offensive pass interference penalties. Darrick Forrest does neither of those. Instead, he kind of runs with the pick, right, and tries to run with it and shed it and get to Foster Moreau, but he fails. So that is the play that we want to get rid of. The team thing that we want to get rid of is the collapses in the fourth quarter. So we're going to dive into that coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you in part by the College Football Playoff. Even if you're just an NFL fan, this is where you're going to see NFL players of the future taking on other teams in bowl games, and especially, of course, in the College Football Playoff. It is that time of year. The College Football Playoff is back, and with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports' coverage of the College Football Playoff begins December 21st, starting with the College Football Playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern, leading into our first matchup, the Southern Methodist University Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern, so don't miss a moment of the action. Watch College Football Playoffs presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, doing our after-action review of the Washington Commanders' 2019 win over the New Orleans Saints. And before we move into our game ball and all those things, we got to talk about the play that we want to trash. Moving from Week 15 to Week 17, or not the play, we already talked about the play, the flat seven crowd combination. The fourth quarter collapses for the Washington Commanders continue this season, and that has got to come to an end. As early as Week 16 against Philadelphia Eagles would be a great time for the Washington Commanders to figure out how to close a game defensively, because it's not a fatigue thing, right? Early on in this process, we kind of started saying, look, it's a fatigue thing. They're on the field a long time. It happens. Look, the Washington Commanders held the ball for 40-plus minutes in this game. They held the ball for 40-plus minutes last week. 2 games in a row, that team has been on the sideline for 40-plus minutes of the game. It is not a fatigue thing physically, but it is a fatigue thing mentally. In this game, it was also an injury and a preservation thing. So Darrick Forrest was the key defender on that touchdown pass that we just talked about. Benjamin St-Juste was the key deficiency on that third down play we talked about. There was an 8-yard run while the Saints were making their comeback. Linebacker Michael Walker is supposed to have contain on, and he ends up losing it. There's a 17-yard run that actually looks like Bobby Wagner got out of his run fit. There's a 19-yard pass to Foster Moreau that Wagner was also in, but passing it into Darrick Forrest's zone, who was way too wide, guarding nothing but grass. Rattler fits the ball in, and then Darrick Forrest takes a bad angle trying to recover, can't bring him down, ends up with a big gain. 25-yard completion to Marquez Valdez-Scantling. It goes against Jeremy Chin, but it's also where Darrick Forrest levels the boom and knocks Chin out of the game. 12-yard run by Kendre Miller, the Saints running back, is just blocked beautifully by the Saints, so no credit there to the Commanders' defense. 2 missed holding penalties on another 12-yard run, officiating a problem in this game, which eventually leads to the stop clock fiasco, and then the touchdown pass that we already discussed. So you've got backups making mistakes, a few starters making mistakes as well, officials making mistakes. And look, you can't blame the Commanders for the officials, obviously, but if you don't get put in that situation in the first place by blown coverages, blown contain, bad penalties, you don't have to worry about it. So between second-string players, ill-timed starter mistakes, officiating mistakes, fourth quarter collapse for the Washington Commanders defense was on. It's the 6th time this year the Commanders defense has allowed double-digit points in the fourth quarter. They have only allowed 3 double-digit scoring quarters in the rest of the 3 quarters all season. Think about that. Quarters 1, 2, and 3 all year long. There have only been 3 of them that have had that where the Commanders defense has allowed double-digit scoring. Already this season, 6 times they've allowed double-digit scoring in the fourth quarter. That is absolutely got to get fixed. Looking at a Dan Quinn quote Chick Hernandez interviewed Dan Quinn exclusively for WSA 9, asked him if he's concerned about the lack of closing games right now as the team gets deeper into December football and, of course, into January. Coach Quinn said, quote, I would say the more of them, the better, because as crazy as our situations have been, when the calendar now is starting to turn, it's going to be more wild, and the games are closer and the games are tighter. And so I want us to have been in as many hard-fought spots as we can, knowing that even at the end, when you have to now go win the game on one play to get a stop, I like that. I like how that feels. I like how you're being into that spot. I don't love some of the mistakes that could have led to it, but I do love that this is a tough group, and that's why I love coaching these guys. I wouldn't trade them for anybody, man. They're tough. They're down for it. They love one another. They're ready to fight, and so those are awesome qualities to have on a team, end quote. That is one heck of a silver lining. I totally get where Coach Quinn is coming from, but like you said, you don't love the mistakes that brought you here, but you do love the fact that they have the resiliency enough to still win those games. And look, when it comes down to December, January playoff football, they're going to need that resiliency. So I see where Coach is coming from. Time for game balls here. My game ball goes to cornerback Marshawn Lattimore. He was our third star last night after the game, because it's really hard to make a guy the number one star when he has zero stats. But he's certainly the most valuable player, at least on the defense from that game, demonstrated by the Saints themselves. 39 coverage snaps Marshawn Lattimore played on, 0 targets. Clearly, the New Orleans Saints knew who the most dangerous commander was on the field yesterday. Insider game ball goes to Terry McLaurin, our number one star for last night. 7 catches, 73 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's about 24 inches total from 180 yards or more and 4 touchdowns. What a game that would have been, man. I'll tell you what. Marshawn Lattimore, Jaden Daniels, Frankie Louvu, Jeremy Chin, Mikey Sandersill, all also getting votes for the Insider game ball. And that's going to wrap up our after action review. On our next episode, we are going to go over 5 things that we learned coming out of this Washington Commanders game. So make sure you come back for that. In the meantime, you got questions or comments, all you got to do is text me directly by going to Locked On Commanders or going to joinsubtext.com/Locked On Commanders. That's where you go. For your next listen, check out Locked On NFL. First in the morning, you get the madman Tyler Rowland, who kicks you off with a double shot of NFL espresso. Then stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. It's the all-new Locked On NFL, and it's twice a day. As always, I thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. Thank you for coming through every dayers on a regular basis like you do. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I will see you right back here next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.